Good morning. Thank you for joining me for another 5 good minutes with the Word. I'm Barry Bryson, and we're continuing our study of the book of Colossians, and we're in Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 through 17. And this is part of the longer section that begins in verse 5, the therefore section. In chapter 2, beginning with verse 6, and all the way through chapter 3, verse 4, he basically has um, established theological truth, talked about how they are straying from theological truth, and then mentioning that theological truth again. And then he gets to the therefore in verse 5. And he talks about the things we have to put aside because they're dead to us because we've been changed. And he talks about in this section how we are different from the inside out, and then how that's visible from the outside looking in. And so he talked about the things we've thrown away. And in verse 11, he talks about putting on and taking off. Or verse 10, excuse me. So we're putting on a new self. He's going to describe that new self and what it looks like in these verses. But he also talked about being renewed from the inside out in verse 10. And he mentioned one of the forces, one of the things generating that renewal inside us in verse 10. He's going to mention a second one in verses 12 through 17. And the first thing he mentioned is true knowledge of the one who created us, God, Christ. Christ is, as he has pointed out, as John has pointed out, is the one through whom we are created. He's already established that. And so really the true knowledge of Christ and God's work through Jesus Christ. Because Christ is all and in all. And when that's true, when this renewal happens, we're all the same, and our earthly distinctions don't matter anymore. So let's pick up with verse 12. And so, as those who have been chosen of God, holy and beloved, put on a heart of compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving each other. Whomever has a complaint against anyone, just as the Lord forgave you, also should you. And beyond all these things, put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. And let the peace of Christ rule in your hearts, to which indeed you were called in one body, and be thankful. Let the word of Christ dwell within you with all wisdom, teaching and admonishing one another with psalms and hymns and spiritual songs, singing with thankfulness in your hearts to God. And whatever you do in word or deed, do all in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God, to Him, through Him, to God the Father. Well, it might seem unusual that singing is part of this, but Paul often um, ends these sections by singing himself, by by lapsing into song. How great is God's love? How faithful is the Lord? And he's doing that again here, and calling them to sing with each other and to each other and for each other, and to find unity in their praise, and to do everything they do in order to give thanks to God through Jesus Christ. It's the perfect way to end this section, this longer section, going all the way back to chapter 2, verse 5. Let's talk about what happens before that. Um, he's already talked about what is in us that comes out, that's renewing us from the inside out. The first thing is the true knowledge of Jesus, of the one who created us. And the second thing, verse 15, is the peace of Christ which reigns in our hearts. And he mentions the body. We're called in one body, and be thankful. And that's when he starts talking about singing. But we have these two forces inside us that are generating renewal and change. One is truth, the truth about Jesus, and the other is the peace that we have because of the truth about Jesus. This inner calm, this confidence inside us that expresses itself outward. And what's the main way in which it expresses itself outward? What is the garment that we are wearing? Galatians 3, he says, put on Christ. In Colossians 3, he says, put on, using the same verb, to put on your clothes, to put on love, which is the perfect bond of unity. We put on love. Love is what, this is the garment that we wear. Love is the garment that we wear. Because we have the truth of Jesus and the peace of Jesus, the confidence that we have in Jesus, then that expresses itself on the outside as love. We put on love as a garment. And what does that look like? Well, it looks like compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, bearing with one another, and forgiving one another if someone wrongs us. That's what it looks like, because that's what Jesus did for us. And so, as he began these verses, we know what it means to die with Christ and to be raised with Christ. It means to be renewed from the inside out by the true knowledge of Jesus and the peace of Christ that we have because we have true knowledge about Jesus. And that expresses itself in love. And love looks like compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, patience, and a bearing with one another. And when we do that, it's time to sing. It's time to sing together. And he says sing. And he means sing, as he meant sing in Ephesians 5. And he talks about the way when we sing together, we not only give thanks, but we let the word of Christ dwell richly within us. Singing is an expression of the word that's in us coming out with all wisdom. And when we do this, we teach and we instruct each other in such a variety of musical styles, psalms, hymns, spiritual songs. And our hearts are filled with thankfulness so that whatever we do in word or deed, we do in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to him through God the Father. Okay. It's just a perfect package of thought and of feeling as well, explaining everything to us. And if they didn't get it at that point, uh, then they're not as intelligent as he thinks they are, or as sincere as he thinks they are. But I think Paul knows what he's talking about, and I think it had its effect. Well, there are other things he needs them to do, and some big things he needs them to do, and particularly one of them to do. We'll be getting to that in the next sessions. We'll pick up with verse 18 next time. Thank you for joining us for another 5 good minutes with the Word.